So, hello Internet, welcome to IPython and Jupyter dev meeting for January 19th. There are not too many people today, so it should be fairly quick, and I have not much to say, so I will go first. It's raining in California, yay! I'm otherwise just pushing IPython 4.1 slowly forward and triaging issues for last week. Nothing else to report. So, Min, do you want to go ahead?
Yep. So at the end of last week, we released Traitlets 4.1 with the new observe tag APIs, and we haven't run into any issues with the new APIs yet, but we have discovered that we triggered a bug in Python 3.5 just because of a deprecation warning that we emit right now. And I'm working with CPython folks on tracking down the actual bug, but it turns out that the code where we actually trigger it is kind of silly nonsense that we can remove and has already been removed in master. So I would like to release IPython 4.03 basically right at the end of this meeting, if that makes sense. It's a small patch that just removes some dead code from a dunder-del method that doesn't make sense because it can never be called except at interpreter teardown when it can apparently crash Python 3.5. Yeah. And I've spent much of the last week in the weeds of 0MQ and Windows and building cryptography libraries on Windows and things. But that has mostly been resolved by now with various small patches to libzmq and pyzmq and things. And then I've also been working on getting IOPub publishing in a thread, which solves the issue of needing to call sys.standardout.flush to make sure that print statements actually show up when you expect them to. So that problem is solved by putting things in a thread and things just kind of show up in a more natural manner. And Thomas has been doing some helpful review on that one, which should be ready to go pretty shortly. Yep, that's me.
Cool. Yeah, I was at Cal Poly last week, Wednesday to Friday. I worked with Anna and Carol to get Anna up to speed with the project. I gave her a demo and kind of a history of IPython and Jupyter together. I also have been working with Min on getting the IOPub rate limiting PR to work well. And I think we're finally getting close to having that done. And then last week, I also introduced a mechanism that allows you to render PNG representations of widgets. And it will actually take those PNG representations and embed them at the top of your outputs per cell. And this is kind of a neat way of allowing widgets to persist to GitHub, NB Viewer, all these different services that only allow static content. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I think, okay. Carol, you're up.
I'm next. Okay. It's mostly been outreach last week. It'll be another heavy week of outreach this week with Southern California Linux Expo and some other things going on. I am looking forward to trying to hook up with some folks that are using JavaScript for documentation that are going to be at that conference. So, and thank you to John for giving me a deep dive into the Jupyter JavaScript stuff last week. Pretty much mop-up work with the documentation, the Qt console. We did some bigger changes on, but I think it's looking good. And at the end of February, I will be keynoting PyCon Philippines and talking about Jupyter and collaboration and education and diversity. So that's it for this week.
I think I'm next. This is Peter. Gino, I don't know if Gino's on, but I'll cover what we've been doing. UX survey. We wrapped that up last Friday. We posted to the Google group, but there's a link there if you didn't see it. Pretty darn good response. I think near 50%, like 46% of the people that clicked the link actually completed it. So that's great in my mind. And now begins the analysis of it, and we'll see what we can pull out, and hopefully the community will do so too. Back on the dashboards and widgets, declarative widgets, those types of things. We've been working, Javier and Drew Logsden, who work with me, have been talking to Sylvan, Jonathan, Stephen about using the new IPy widgets plus Jupyter.js widgets in standalone dashboard apps. And, we're making progress. It's been bugs fixed on both sides, and we'll continue down that path. I did some TempMB work to add a programmatic auth and a little admin endpoint with just, one resource on it today, but basically this is all in the vein of making it possible or easier to invoke TempMB APIs programmatically and drain off old containers and put a light level of authentication, token auth on it. Again, so that new clients like dashboards or other programmatic clients can talk to TempMB and request kernels and so on. We've got some people looking at Jupyter Lab in earnest now, trying to bring it up, get familiar with it. They started doing it, and I'm sure they'll reach out with questions on Gitter and things like that, just bringing up what's there, so we can start getting familiar with it. So we start to look towards the future, porting what we've done. And I just want to point out, for what it's worth, there was a little blog post from someone on our team that actually used Jupyter, Spark, dashboards, widgets, all these wonderful things in a customer engagement and consulting engagement here at IBM. And we wrote that up to share how all these pieces kind of come together. So if you're interested in that, check it out. That's it for me. I think Safia's next.
Yes, I am. So I spent a lot of time last week adding sorting to the notebook file tree, which was merged super recently. Also very recently worked on Shinx, which I have linked to in the hackpad. It's basically live watching on the kernel runtime directory. So anytime somebody starts up Jupyter Console or Jupyter Notebook, you can listen in on that from Node. We opened up ticket sales for Day Chicago last Tuesday, and over a third have been sold. So that's so far so good. And I've been working on a bug in IPy widgets where dropdowns that are at the end of a notebook aren't rendered properly. So I'm working on a JavaScript-based fix for that based on input from John. And that's it for me. I will mute now.
Do we have Anna, or am I next?
I think Anna just wanted to post an announcement.
Okay, well, for anybody who can't see the hackpad, if you've not yet replied if you've got the email about the dev meeting scheduling and you haven't responded to it, then do so promptly. So my own stuff, I have been continuing to work on adapting IPython to use the prompt toolkit interface. It's since the last update, we have the event loop integration working, so you can have interactive matplotlib as you carry on typing in the console. Colored output working on Windows, and the set next input thing working, so you can do things like %load and %recall at the prompt. The author of Prompt Toolkit also added continuation prompts for us, so it looks nicer now when you have a multi-line area. But you do for the moment need to use Prompt Toolkit from master if you're testing it out. And then I've been putting together an abstract for PyData Amsterdam. You'll hope that's the conference is in March, the deadline is in February. So hopefully Min and or I will be there. And if anybody's interested in seeing what we're going to say in the abstract, then let me know and I'll add you to the Google Doc. Eve, you're next, I think.
I think I'm next. So last week got the phosphate key map working. Had PRs on the key map, the phosphide example, and one of the Jupyter JS repos. This week, basically remerging it on the new command APIs that were put in like yesterday or over the weekend. And then that's pretty much it. Steve?
Yes, I've been working on the various Jupyter JS repos, kind of flowing through all of them, iterating and getting this whole thing stood up, and it culminated in the PR to add the lab page to the Jupyter notebook. So that actually works, and it should, from my testing, it should actually work on the setup.py install as well, where it bootstrap itself and install the lab page requirements. So I'll be continuing to work with Jason. We just got the notebook execution working, rudimentary version of that working this morning. So we'll be continuing to refine all these pieces. That's it.
Nice.
I think it's me. So I continued working on the command palette, and it's pretty much feature complete now. I think you have keyboard navigation around it. It's fully integrated with the command registry, so that if a command becomes disabled or enabled, and the palette is rendered, it automatically reflects that. It's also now easier to subclass. All of the markup has been separated into 3 static methods that can be overridden, so that if somebody for some reason wanted a radically different thing, they could implement it. And then the other thing is that we decided on a convention for how core plugins get injected into a Phosphide app. They don't push themselves into the DOM anymore. Instead, it's up to the user, the consumer of a Phosphide app, to create a small plugin application class that puts everything in the DOM. So we have an example, and that's being used in Phosphide example now and in Jupyter JS plugins, instead of what we had before, where the app shell and the command palette were sort of injecting themselves. That seemed a little bit too heavy-handed. And that's it. I think it's Chris next.
Okay, my turn. So I was on vacation last week, so I didn't do anything. It was great. I suggest more people do that. This week, I'm catching back up with what the team did last week, working on the menu manager plugin for Phosphide. Hopefully that'll be done shortly. And once that is complete, then we'll go about basically going over Cameron's mock-ups that he's done with a fine-tooth comb, and make sure all of our CSS styling basically adheres to those mock-ups that have been done. That's it for me. I think Nick's next.
Thanks, Chris. So I've been sort of on my own time working on NB diffstream, which is a visual diff form of the NB dime work, and so it looks at the DOM real heavy and things like that. My initial static demo, there's a link there in the hack pad, and I also got it working in NB Viewer just so I had a source of more things to try. I'm still working through parsing through the NB dime format, which is changing rapidly, but I'm working with Martin on that, so it's going well. And already there's talk from different people about integrating this directly into the notebook. So basically the front end on top of the local NB convert services, and then a new notional NB dime service that's a normal, Jupyter server kind of app. So right now I'm just going to continue to concentrate on the front end piece and start working on image diff and the things that are really out there. On NB Presents, been a little bit slower. Just working on legacy slideshow import, testing that, making sure that the build generates a completely bulletproof archival grade HTML output, and started talking about themes there. I'm not sure if themes are necessarily relevant to the broader notebook. If there's already some discussions about that I've seen in some places, because the design constraints are a lot different for statically dimensioned documents rather than infinitely scrolling documents. Then this evening, in terms of outreach, I'm doing some work with the PyData Atlanta folks. I'm not actually an organizer or anything on that yet, but we're going to be meeting up at a local startup, looking at some PyData or some data from Yelp from their academic challenge, and at least part of it's going to be notebook focused, just introducing stuff to people. So do a little interact, do a little display, do a little Jinja, do a little bokeh, do little pandas, as basically little bite-sized pieces. We'll probably have a GitHub organization up for that soon. That's about it. Thanks. I think Fernando's next, but like you showed.
Okay, anybody else?
Nope. So anyone want to add something before I stop the recording?
Oh, I guess one thing I forgot. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention was I did opened a PR to add multiple undo for cell deletion to the notebook that people have been asking for a while. That if people want to look at that PR.
Sure, and also we have other repository to release that are not IPython related, and we depend on for 4.1. What's the name already? Pickle utils. Or no. Oh, anyway, we can see that later. Okay, so see you everyone on the internet, on GitHub, on Gitter, and everything. And
thanks.
See you next week.